So we're going to go through gas exchange and some of the key points that you need to know. And the first thing that you need to know is you need to be able to do is distinguish between ventilation, gas exchange, and cell respiration. So you need to be able to tell the difference between these three things that are all related to gas exchange, but they each mean different terms. So ventilation is the process of bringing in fresh air into the alveoli of your lungs and removing what we call stale air, which really is just air with high concentrations of carbon dioxide. And this fresh air is air with high concentrations of O2. And so when I say high concentration of oxygen, I'm actually also implying low concentrations of carbon dioxide in this fresh air. And when I say stale air that has high concentrations of carbon dioxide, I'm implying they're low concentrations of oxygen. And then gas exchange is the process of swapping CO2 for oxygen in your bloodstream. And so this happens when the capillary bed interacts with your alveoli, where the gas exchange occurs. And cell respiration, which I'm going to bring back in the connections podcast. But the cell respiration is the process by which our bodies, more specifically mitochondria, that organelle inside of our cells, the mitochondria convert oxygen into energy molecules that we call ATP. Now I'm going to add a note here. This is just a quick connection because I can't resist making it. So you should know that cell respiration has this formula, and it's not something I expect you to know off the top of your head, and we're going to talk in more detail about this, but just as a general concept, that we've got glucose, which is a sugar, a monosaccharide, and oxygen. Our body uses that to convert this into carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. And we're going to talk in more detail about this in the next unit. But this glucose we get into our body through the villi of our small intestines from the food that we eat. We take this oxygen in through the alveoli of our lungs, and they flow through our bodies, through the bloodstream. And when our cells grab that out of the bloodstream, because remember, capillaries are so small that they can get to every single cell, our body takes these two reactants or ingredients in, and through the process of cellular respiration, converts that into carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. ATP is that energy molecule that we use around our body. Think back to our discussions on neurons and active transport. So sending signals through that, muscle contractions. There are going to be some other connections I make in the final podcast and prep for this test. And it produces carbon dioxide, which we have to send back through our bloodstream, back to the alveoli for gas exchange to get rid of it, because it is toxic to us. So these three processes help each other, but this is the chemical process that we're building to, and that's really the reason that all of this happens. And then we talked a little bit about water. Well, we're talking about water. We'll continue to talk a little bit about water, but note that we do make water here, so water's not really a closed system. Okay, and so we need to talk about the importance of having this ventilation system, and I've kind of alluded to some of those reasons. So let's just continue. Um, so why have a ventilation system? And that system, what we're talking about, are the things in the drawing for this section. And the first reason here is to maintain a concentration gradient. And what that means is that you're going to have more of one kind of gas on one side of the alveoli than the other, which helps to push or increase the rate of diffusion of these molecules. So having CO2 on one side of a membrane, lots of CO2 on one side and oxygen on the other side, causes the CO2 to diffuse this way and the oxygen to diffuse across the membrane that way. And so it's important to maintain that concentration gradient because the molecules are going to bump into each other and spread out across this membrane. So I mentioned this, that the body needs oxygen to make ATP via cellular respiration. 3, we need to get rid of toxic CO2. And really, these reasons are the functionality of our ventilation system. So in order to get rid of carbon dioxide and to take in oxygen, there needs to be a high concentration gradient. And the alveoli allow that to happen by having increased surface area to allow faster gas exchange and maintain high concentration gradients. Okay, so I hope that explains that for you. Okay, and so let's more specifically talk about, let me pick a different color here so we can be clear that we're talking about something that's a little different. And so we're going to talk about the alveoli. So alveoli is the plural of alveolus. We have lots of alveoli in our lungs. And we need to talk about the structures that they have that help them in their function of gas exchange. So we're going to talk about the structure as it relates to function. So so often we use this as a theme throughout biology, and this structure and function. I didn't talk about this in this way in the digestive system, but it's very similar when we talk about the villus of the small intestines. Okay, so there are lots of them, lots of alveoli, which increases the surface area, which allows for faster rates of diffusion. The wall, the membrane is single celled in thickness. So it's important to know that. It's only one cell thick. So there's not a lot of distance. That the gases have to travel to diffuse. Okay? Third, there is a dense capillary bed. And sometimes this is described as a capillary network that surround the alveoli, waiting and aiding in gas exchange. And fourth, some of the cells, so some cells here secrete. Let me do that one again. They secrete. Excuse me. Secrete a fluid, and having that fluid increases the ability for the gases to dissolve or embed into that fluid and then diffuse even faster. Okay? So there's some more chemistry there that we're not really going to get into, but that's the list of things that you need to know that explain why alveoli are structured to aid in their function. All right, so the next thing is the drawing. I'm not going to do that. And the last thing we need to do is talk about the mechanism of ventilation of the lungs in terms of volume and pressure changes in reference to intercostal muscles and the diaphragm. So I'm going to just do two lists here. One is going to be for inhalation or inhaling, and the other, I guess I can do a different color here. And exhaling. Okay, so let's talk about inhaling. So this is when you breathe in. So your intercostal muscles contract. Now your intercostal muscles are the muscles that are embedded within your ribs. So when you breathe in, what this actually does is it moves your ribs up and out. And I hope that you're consciously observing what's happening to your body when you breathe in. So breathe in, and you notice that your ribs come out. When you inhale, you notice that your ribs come out, and what that does is opens up more space, more volume inside. But also, what's happening is that your diaphragm, spelled as diaphragm contracts. Now, if you don't know where your diaphragm is, watch the video with the drawing. But when this contracts, so the diaphragm is the muscle that sits underneath your lungs. And as it moves down and sits relatively flat. And so what this causes is increased volume in your thoracic cavity or in your chest. So there's more volume in your chest, which increased volume means that there's decreased pressure inside your body. And when there's when this pressure drops, the decreased pressure, so it decreases pressure. So at the point where your chest's pressure is lower than the atmosphere that you are in, the atmosphere's pressure, air floods in. So when that happens, air floods in through your nose or your mouth, into your trachea, down your bronchi, down to your bronchioles, and into your alveoli, and it continues until there's equilibrium between the atmosphere's pressure and your chest's pressure. Okay? So once you get all that fresh air in, you need to get rid of the stale air that has filled your lungs through the gas exchange at the alveoli. So something else happens here. So let me actually make one clarification. So there are two types of intercostal muscles. They're internal and external. These are the external ones. These are at your rib cages, but on the outside. And then on the for exhaling, the internal ones, internal intercostals, contract. Now this may seem confusing, but think of this. I think of this as an analogy with your arm. You've got a bicep and you've got a tricep. And in order to move your arm, one of those muscles has to be contracting. If you've got your arm out, extended in a straight line, and you try to if you're trying to bend at your elbow, what you're doing is contracting your bicep. But when you try to put your arm back out in a straight line, you're actually contracting your tricep. So it's different muscles that contract that cause movement. So these internal intercostal muscles contract, causing the rib cage to move down and in. Oops, excuse me. Sorry about that. That was my mother calling. All right, so you're actually, what ends up happening is that your diaphragm gets pushed back. So it depends on where you look. Sometimes it's referred to as it is relaxing. Some people will say that it gets pushed by your abdominal muscles that are pushing back on it. But in essence, what happens is the diaphragm goes back to its original shape, which is up and kind of like an upside down U shape. So it actually looks like this. And what that does is decreases the volume in your chest, which increases the pressure. And when at the point when the internal pressure of your chest is higher than the environment, air floods out in order to reach an equilibrium of air pressure in your chest and out. And so this process goes back and forth with every breath that you take. And it's really only when you're exhaling that you can make sounds. So when I'm talking, I'm actually exhaling over a long period of time. And when I take a break, I inhale. And then as I talk, I exhale. Inhale, and then exhale. And so that process goes back and forth, and that's continuously how we ventilate, so that we can foster gas exchange, so that the blood can carry the oxygen after having grabbed glucose already from the villi of the small intestine to every single cell, where the mitochondria use those ingredients. And again, we'll talk more detail soon, where really the cytoplasm and the mitochondria use those ingredients to create ATP, water, and carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide goes back to the blood, goes back to the alveolus, so that for the next inhalation or a future inhalation, when there's increased oxygen in the alveolus, there's higher amounts of carbon dioxide in the blood, so that they will diffuse across the membrane. And so when you exhale, you're getting rid of that stale air with high concentration of carbon dioxide. This is a long process, and I hope this makes sense. And we'll wrap it up because I see that I'm nearing a 20-minute mark. Okay?